What's up, everybody? Another trial has come to a conclusion that we have watched the vast majority of together. And tonight we're going to watch the verdict read live together. We are going to discuss the verdict. I think it's so interesting how often people think juries are going to hang, that there's going to be a hung jury, a split vote. They could never make a decision. I see the chat talking about it, and I put out a poll, and not many people thought it was going to be a hung jury. The vast majority thought it was going to be a guilty verdict. I put on there that if there was a verdict today before court closed, no doubt in my mind it was going to be guilty. But if they continued to discuss it until tomorrow, it would have gotten interesting. Do we have a holdout? Do we have somebody that believed Charlie Adelson's story? Turns out, no, we don't. And we're going to hear and watch the verdict read and watch Charlie Adelson and watch his attorney. And then we're going to dive into closing arguments to try to pick out what in closings tied it together for the jury to come to their verdict of guilty. Some things the state did, some things the defense did, I think can point us and show us how the evidence was presented and came out at trial to where the jury got there. I see people commenting on the Christmas tree up already. We got like multiple Christmas trees up already. We are fully decked out. Christmas decorations. November 1st is the person that my wife is. I see Azam is not feeling well. Azam, I hope you feel better soon. Glad you're hanging in here. Yes, so justice for Dan Markell continues. And some people were telling me, Georgia, the lead prosecutor said, stay tuned when asked if other Adelsons may be facing charges. So we will stay tuned, Georgia, and continue to watch how justice unfolds, maybe slowly, but methodically. And the way that it should be, when you have enough, you make the call, you indict, you try, and you convict when you have the right person. So let's get to the verdict, and then we will discuss your questions before we get to the closing arguments. Hit that like button if you guys haven't already. I know a lot of you do when you first come in. And subscribe. We're getting so close to 300,000 subscribers before the end of the year. That's the goal. So if you haven't subscribed, that would be awesome if you did. Let's get to the verdict. Here we go.
The verdict form is in its proper order. Madam Clerk, please publish the verdict.
In the Circuit Court of the Second Judicial Circuit in and for Leon County, Florida, the state of Florida versus Charles Adelson, case number 2016 CF 3036B, verdict. Count 1. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the indictment, first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Count 2. We, the jury.
Yeah. So guilty on count 1 is pretty much the end for Charlie Adelson. He's looking at life in prison. That's what he's going to get. And he realizes once you're guilty on count 1, nothing else really matters. But we will listen to the rest of the verdict, and then we'll listen to the jury being polled.
Find as follows as to count 2 of the indictment, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Count 3. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 3 of the indictment, solicitation to commit first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder. So say we all this 6th day of November, 2023.
Does the defense wish for the court to poll the jurors?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror Moore, was your verdict and the verdict of the jury as a whole just announced?
Yes.
Juror Brazos, was your verdict and the verdict of the jury as a whole just announced?
It was.
So he does read all the names. I didn't notice that until somebody said. So we'll just pause the poll there, just for precaution's sake. Not that I think anything's going to happen to any of these jurors. They did their duty. And Jane asked how hyped I am. So I'm not really hyped that somebody did this or got convicted of this, but when it comes to justice being served, to me, before this trial started, and this was one that, I was slow to jump on because uh, Professor Markel was one of my law school professors at Florida State College of Law. I knew a lot about the cases. I knew a lot about the other trials, and it just seemed impossible that Charlie Adelson was not involved. But I tried to play it fair. I saw some people saying I was too nice to the defense or too pro defense throughout my breakdowns. I just tried to call it down the middle. I tried to put all that outside as I'm just breaking down the trial like any other trial, coming into it, what the state proved, and some missteps that I think the defense may have had throughout the case and creating a burden potentially. To me, we'll talk about it and get into it more when we get into the closings. But as far as a guilty verdict, I'm not surprised. But I wouldn't have been surprised with a hung jury either, because when you do this all or nothing defense, sometimes a juror will grab onto that. Hung jurors are so, I would have put it like 95% guilty, 5% hung jury. I really would have been shocked if they convinced this entire jury that the more unlikely or more complicated explanation was actually true, as the prosecutor said in her first question to Charlie Adelson on cross. So I don't know if a hyped is the right word, but I'm glad for Markel and his family for more justice in their case and all the people that came together to do this to them. And they're getting what, the law allows. Azam, even under the weather, is gifting memberships. Thank you, Azam. We've had so many new members come in. It's so awesome. Melissa, welcome. Christy, welcome. And Netwoman gifting 10 memberships. Just going wild, bringing everybody in, bringing everybody together. Chris also gifted a membership. That's awesome, Chris. Thank you. Nirvana, what is the significance of polling the jury? So for appellate purposes, you usually want to do that. But also if there is a holdout juror that felt like they were pushed or bullied into voting a certain way, now is their chance. They have the protection of the court. It's in open court. Everybody hears you. Nobody's going to be able to bully you in that jury room. So if you really wanted to vote not guilty, now is your chance. It just gives them that opportunity. That's really why, because we want jurors to vote the way they believe in their conscience and what they think based on the evidence and the testimony and the law. And sometimes they can get bullied back in that room. So we as lawyers just want to make sure that that did not happen. Katie, hey, Peter, not to jump ahead, but wondering why the judge said all the jurors' names after the verdict was read. Never seen that before, but not a fan. So it does happen. It depends on the judge. There's nothing necessarily that you can't do. And I believe I heard this judge say the jurors' names will stay confidential until the verdict. I think that's what he said. I've been following multiple trials now, to be honest. So I could be confusing it with another trial, but so no real surprise there. Let's see. So the max he's looking at here for the conspiracy charges that he was convicted on is life. Ashley, 2 videos and a live. I'm getting spoiled on my B-Day. Can we also discuss juror number 1 getting to stay in the Maya trial? Maybe at the end, but there's a lot I want to get to here in Adelson and focusing on these closing arguments now to try to pick and figure out what may have pushed the jury over the edge to this verdict through closings. Donna also gifting a membership. So cool how that's something that so many of the members do. And Lady Law Sandra re-upped her membership. Welcome back. Netwoman, dumb question, but how come some defendants don't stand during the verdict? It's up to the judge. Sometimes judges say all rise. Sometimes defendants ask if they can sit. Sometimes they're so nervous. It really just depends. Nicole Mobley, his facial expressions during the trial were enough for me after day 1. I understand that. I try to not, make a call just based off of that, but I can understand why they were off-putting based on how he was acting and kind of the smirks throughout the trial. America J. Sean, welcome. All right, so now we get to the closing arguments, which I thought were really interesting. I thought the prosecutor did some things I really liked, did some things I don't love when they do, but I understand why they do it. But we're going to go pretty much to the beginning of her closing argument, where we want to start in what was effective in giving the jury what they needed to find, in their favor and convict Charlie Adelson. Sue, Peter, what was Professor Dan really like? He was, and I hope that this is not offensive, but Charlie Adelson kind of described him as kind of nerdy. He was kind of nerdy, but he was like a very brilliant, up and coming young superstar type. There were a few lawyers. I mean, there were a few professors at Florida State that were there for like 50 years. A couple actually, like Earhart, who literally wrote the book on evidence in Florida, is a Florida State professor. He was one of my dad's professors when he was there 50 years ago, literally. There was multiple professors there that were there when my dad was there. And then there are some young up and coming superstars. I would think Markell was the type of guy that was probably going to move his way up the ladder to like an Ivy League type of professor. That's the kind of professor he was. And I didn't have like some great relationship with him. He wasn't a professor I got really close to, like Earhart I did, being on trial team. Earhart would go through my trial packet with me, help me with objections and things like that. So there was a couple of professors. Another professor I was a research assistant for. None of that really happened with Markell. I just knew him, knew who he was, how he taught, sat in some of his lectures, things like that. And he was just a really smart guy is how I would describe him. Mr. Recon, been watching a while. Time to give back. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much, Mr. Recon. And your name kind of says it all, right? All right, let's get to closing arguments and we will answer more questions as we go. So the state opens up and explains some of the problems with what the defense has presented in this case. And so let's listen in.
Be unduly influenced by the notes of other jurors. Notes are not entitled to any greater weight than each juror's.
In jury selection, we talked about the burden of proof and how it was my burden to prove this case to you beyond a reasonable doubt through evidence. And generally speaking, the defense's job is to poke holes in the evidence and argue that it falls short of meeting that high burden. And we also learned at jury selection that the defense does not have to prove anything. But sometimes if the law enforcement investigation is so thorough and so compelling that there's really no way to poke holes in the evidence, he has to basically admit his own words, his own text messages. That stuff is undeniable, right?
So I like that, right? Because we were saying something we've been saying all along, like Charlie Adelson is just kind of taking a lot of the state's evidence and saying, yeah, that's true, but here's the right way to look at it, not that. So what does she say? And this is interesting. I don't know if this will become an appellate issue as I'm thinking about it, but kind of attacking the way the defense goes, saying the police investigation was so thorough, the evidence was so piled up against him. Again, like I said, a mountain of evidence with these text messages and recordings. So he really had no choice but to agree with that evidence and to agree with the investigation and find a way to flip it, basically. That's all they had. That's the only move they had on the chessboard. And sometimes you got to be careful about calling out the defense in a case and their constitutional rights to present a defense and that they don't have a burden. So I can say the defense created a burden. The state can absolutely not say that the defense created a burden or insinuate in any way that they have a burden in this case. And she didn't even come close to saying that. So I don't think it is an issue. But it's interesting that she says this is all they had. They had to make this move because the evidence was irrefutable.
And those things prove that he was in cahoots with Catherine McDaniel in 2013, through the murder in 2014, and all the way up until her arrest in October of 2016. He knows he can't deny that he paid the killers because of this bizarre practice he had of stapling his money. So sometimes when a defendant can't attack the facts or the law, they instead try to explain it away by saying, you can't trust what you're seeing. It's not what it appears to be. It's actually something else entirely. Often, as in this case, the individual explanation, so when you zoom in on one piece of evidence with its attached explanation, can be like, maybe. But when you zoom out and you add all these things together, this explanation, this explanation, this explanation, this coincidence, and this coincidence, and this coincidence, it starts making less and less sense. It starts being less and less reasonable. And when you zoom out from the defense's theory, it's really unreasonable, right? Because to find it reasonable, you have to buy a lot of things that he's selling. The most obvious of which is that...
So she keeps using the word reasonable now because we know that in order for a doubt to bring a not guilty verdict, it has to be reasonable. So she's using the proper terminology to show how unreasonable it is and what you have to buy in order to believe it, and taking all these leaps that really don't make sense.
Because Sigfredo Garcia hated him, he and Rivera traveled to Tallahassee twice to kill someone he hated in hopes that he would give them money for it on the back end. Please think about that. To hit this defendant where it hurts, these two dudes with no connection at all to Dan Markel, and without 2 nickels to rub together, rented a car and paid for gas to come to Tallahassee and stay in a hotel twice in order to kill someone that this defendant hated, to harm him. And for what? To maybe get money. Maybe he just turns him in for murder. Why not?
So I want to pause here because I was going to discuss it when the defense comes up and they're closing, but interesting theory there, because while I agree with her and it doesn't make sense that they would do that without knowing that they'd get paid, but that's also what happened under the state's theory, right? There was never any argument that they got paid before any amount of money. And they did drive up there not once, but twice and rent cars and stay in a hotel in hopes that they would get paid under a different premise. But the defense does say that in their closing. And I actually thought that was a good point made by the defense. Not enough, but a good point made by the defense that it's so unreasonable that these 2 people would go up there and do this without a guarantee of getting paid or without some kind of money up front. It's like, yeah, but that's exactly what they did, even under your theory. Just interesting point.
Just kill and rob him if what you're after is money and there's no hired hit.
And that makes sense.
Why not just kill and rob him if your motive is we hate him? Then the bad guys don't even have any contact with him, according to his own story. They didn't threaten him. They did not beat him into submission. Instead, they sent his own girlfriend to extort him on their behalf. And without any actual contact from the bad guys, the defendant just opened up his safe and handed over his beloved money that he had saved his entire life since he was a child.
We talked about that, right? Does a guy who loves his money so much that he just looks at it and he counts it and staples it and stacks it in a safe, does he just give it away at the first request? Or would he fight it? Would he refuse to pay? Would he know they were going to keep coming back for more, which is what happened when he actually got extorted fakely by the undercover cops? It's a great point. I mean, when we say it's a great point 3 days ago or whenever the cross-examination was and she brings it out at closing, she's making a great point. I'm obviously going to agree. That's a great point. Really great point.
He just handed it over. Take it all. And when that amount wasn't sufficient, these stone-cold murdering gangsters let the defendant go on a payment plan to give him the rest of the money. They let Catherine McVanois skim off the top each month. And never, over the next 2 years that he was being extorted monthly, these gangsters, and remember that money doesn't go to the principal, that $3,000 a month. They never show up to demand the remaining $195,000 that this defendant has agreed to pay them. Then you also need to find reasonable that over the 2 years of this supposed extortion layaway plan, that the defendant continued to do what? Send these kissy faces and love texts to Catherine McVanois. He's sending these messages to a woman who got him into this mess, and he says he didn't suspect she was involved. What do we know about this man? He didn't suspect she was involved. She's taking the money. He's never even heard from the bad guys. He didn't see it that way, that she got him into this mess. They grew closer after she began extorting him for $3,000 a month. Meanwhile, the defendant and Catherine McVanois break up. She continues to maintain her direct and indirect contact with Sigfredo Garcia, the man who's extorting him.
So they then, and this is the part that I didn't love, right? I liked the beginning, and that's really important. The beginning and the end is so important of a closing argument. Now, she stood behind the podium. She looked at notes, but she didn't read. It wasn't the most exciting bring down the house, but prosecutors don't have to do that. They've got the evidence on their side. They've got the investigation, law enforcement. The guy was arrested. He's been sitting in jail for a year and a half. They've got it all on their side. What they have to be is thorough, get through the facts, and provide enough for the jury to go back there and fight for a guilty verdict, the ones that are on their side. Now, one thing she did that I didn't think was necessary was go through all of the facts that they already agreed on with the money and the driving and who did it, and that it was Garcia and Rivera, and they did it on this date, and we have their car drove here and their cell phone pinged there. Some of that I thought was unnecessary, but I also understand why she did it. I get why she did it. It was thorough. It was fine. I don't think it took away from the closing. I just think it was possible for some jurors to maybe get bored because they had already heard that stuff recited multiple times by both sides, and both sides kind of agreed. But she did focus in on the differences between the two stories, the state's theory and the defense's theory. And she talked about how It's all fun and games to trash talk and make jokes about your in-laws and say, the TV is cheaper than a hitman, until and unless they actually do hire a hitman to get the job done. And until that becomes a fact, then it's not so funny anymore. It's not a coincidence. It becomes very relevant. Downplaying the involvement in the divorce. The fact that that was a big theory in the case and the defense said that. Those emails from Donna Adelson show what kind of venom runs through the veins of this family. And I get it. I think that this happens in a lot of family law cases. And I think there's a lot of anger and resentment and horrible wishes on each other's family. But when it actually happens, the way it happened in this case, they're the first and most prime suspects for a reason. They have the greatest motive, and some of it is borne out in these emails. And the grandma motion never got decided when Dan Markell tried to file a motion that Donna Adelson couldn't be with the kids unless supervised. They were living with her, going to school across the street with her. I know they eventually moved out. Think about that. And then a very, very important fact that when you have it, you got to use it. And she used it over and over and over again and hammered it home. When you have the defendant's own words, use them against him. He will hang himself. Who are they going to believe, an oral surgeon or a gang member? Well, let's talk about that gang member. Yeah, he took a plea deal, but guess what? The only thing he had to do is get up on that stand and tell the truth. And that's what he did. Now, the defense uses Luis Rivera as well, so we'll get there. If you also watch the defense attorney kind of throughout closing, he does kind of smile and smirk a bit here and there as if, haha, we got you. You said what we wanted you to say. That's actually good for us. That fits into our theory. Just wait till I get up there. And I don't think he hammered it home quite like he thought he did. It's always interesting to do these recaps after, because I obviously watched the closing, prepped my notes, had things I was going to say. And for the prosecutor, it was overall a positive. The negative would have been a little too much of just another recitation of the facts again, and some repetition with that. But overall, I thought she had enough focus on the differences in crushing the defendant's theory. Then another thing I thought was kind of a good illustration that we'll just put up here real quick to take a look at is this map about where Wendy Adelson actually drove, which is the purple line. The yellow flag that says Trescott Drive is where the crime occurred and where she used to live. And then she drove all the way around to get to the party. This is a good illustration because you can say she drove out of her way. I don't even know how much longer this is, right? This could only be like 1 minute longer, depending. I mean, it's Tallahassee. Everything's close together in Tallahassee. But whether it's 1 minute longer or 5, when I'm looking at this map, it looks like it's 10 times longer, right? That's a good illustration. Look at how far she drove out of the way. And when she saw all the commotion at the house, did she call him? Did she see if the kids were okay? No, she did nothing. And while I do believe that people sometimes do drive the most familiar way, my wife does it all the time, especially if you're not great with directions. I think that's very plausible. And the defense tried to explain it away with that. But this illustration is really good, really powerful for the prosecution, I thought. Then I thought it was a good point that Katie asked to be on the payroll. Actually, we are going to play a little bit of this because she lists the 4 most unbelievable things about his defense, which again, I loved. Every time she was hammering his defense, I loved it. When she was just saying, like, they got a hotel, they went here, then they went back, and they got another hotel, and they drove here and drove back. I get why she needed to do it. to me took a little long getting through it, but I liked this part.
Of her way to go by the crime scene on her way to get the bullet burden should raise an eyebrow. But it's what she didn't do.
Just kidding.
That's even more.
This is ahead. This is ahead a little bit. Let me jump ahead. So she also talks about how, both sides always say, and I always think it's so funny, and you got to be careful how you use it, but it's don't check your common sense at the door. Both sides use that so much. Then I think she did a good job to show these post-crime texts, like he's going to the gym. Are you going to the beach? It's a beautiful day out. I'm at the pool. Awesome. Must be so nice. And we're supposed to believe that he only did this because Catherine McBanois told him, just pretend like this never happened. And I thought these were really damning. But let's get to some of her explanation of the four most unbelievable things about Charlie Adelson's defense.
All of the money that he stared at and loved on since he was a child. And he wants to know if she's the money. He's texting McBanois within hours of her.
And she again takes a shot again. I think it's a great point. All the money he loved and stared at as a child. I mean, I think that's a good point. They said it, and then he let it go like that.
Getting with all the money in his safe. All of the money that he stared at and loved on since he was a child. And he wants to know if she's going to the pool. This might be a good time to remind you that the jury room is not a place to check your common sense. We want you to bring it in there. You have heard two wildly different versions of how this thing went down, and they can't both be right. I mean, somebody's trying to sell you a bill of goods. You were selected with the belief that you would be able to cut through the garbage and make sense of the evidence in this case and render a verdict that speaks the truth. A major problem for the defense theory is the idea that the defendant and McBanois broke up after the murder, but then grew closer together over the next 2 years as she was collecting his monthly extortion payments. This is one of the more unreasonable parts of the defendant's testimony, or was definitely in the top four, along with Latin King extortion payment plans, hitmen that hire themselves to kill someone that their intended future extortion victim hates. And most unreasonable of all is probably that Charlie Adelson, the guy that talks so tough in the hot tub about his unsavory connections, but an arrogant man of extraordinary resources, a prize fighter of verbosity, would just lay down and take this.
Another great point. Again, something we talked about. This guy that we saw in the text messages, and I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to bring my gun, and they're going to believe an oral surgeon or a gang member? This isn't what that is. I'm not paying them anything. They're going to keep coming back asking for more. This guy just said, yes, ma'am, and thank you, sir. May I have another? This guy, we're supposed to believe that? I love it. That's hitting him where it hurts. That's what you do in closing argument. You don't try to do it on cross-examination. You maybe try to get him fired up once or twice, but this is when you do it. In closing argument, where nobody can get up and disagree with you. And if the jury remembers it the way everybody else does watching him and listening to those tapes and reading those text messages, you figure out the kind of guy Charlie Adelson is. And he's not the kind of guy that just sits back quietly, giving the money he loved so much and loved to stare at and didn't ask any questions and didn't need any proof. He trusted her and thought she was protecting him. Not this guy. It's not the same guy. And she does it a couple times, but here was one, and I thought it hit home.
In silence. Let's review some of these love texts. We've got that one. Then we've got July 22nd.
All right, we don't need to review more of the love text, but yeah, showing their relationship, I again think was not great for Charlie. Let's answer a couple questions here. Brooklyn Basement. What's up with Wendy's immunity? Seems unfair. I heard it was just partial. I haven't read the immunity agreement, but as far as I'm concerned, I think they can still go after her, especially if they think she lied, things like that. But I mean, they probably gave her immunity, same reason they gave Catherine McBanois, because they thought Charlie Adelson, or maybe to get her to flip on the shooters or get her to flip on Kate McBanois, they needed help and testimony in convicting people involved, and maybe they did not think that she was the one that was most involved. Lady Lysandra, where did you think the defense failed? And honestly, it hurts that those kids lost so much already. Yeah, there's nothing to be hyped about. It's brutally sad. Even Adelson, who took part in it, felt bad for the kids. I think they failed in a couple different areas, but the number one scary thing is whenever you kind of put a burden that you've got to prove your side of the story when you don't have a burden of proof. But we're going to get more into this when we watch their closing. Moon, Peter, did you know Wendy then too? I did not. Applejacks, what's next in the case in your opinion? I think that the next one that they're going to point the finger at is going to be Donna Adelson, mom, not Wendy. I think Donna is going to be next. I think eventually they might get to Wendy. I'm not even sure Harvey is really that involved, but I think Donna Adelson, and based on the emails and a lot of stuff she said, I think they've got a lot against her. Diana, in my opinion, he knew his story too well. It wasn't believable to me that he could recall calls, texts from years ago so well, but then he couldn't remember what he said during testimony the day prior. You know what's funny about this, Diana? I think maybe Charlie's attorney was looking on some message boards. Maybe both attorneys were. I don't know. But I think people were saying exactly what you're saying here. And I think that was kind of a common sentiment. Because in his closing argument, he gave an excuse for this. He explained this away. He said, if you're wondering how he had all this stuff memorized so much, he's been sitting in his jail cell for a year and a half with nothing to do but focus on this case because his life is on the line. So he felt the need to explain why Charlie knew this story all too well. Melissa, looked like Adelson's attorney told him something before the jury entered the courtroom and he looked defeated. Did his lawyer know the verdict before it announced in court? So no, his lawyer didn't know the verdict, I don't think. But it's not good news when you have a trial this kind of convoluted and long and it only takes a couple hours, same day, for them to come back with a verdict. That's why I posted on Twitter. I'm not some rocket scientist. I'm not some fortune teller. I just said if they come back with a verdict today, it's probably guilty. Just the time it takes to review any recordings, pick a foreperson, read the jury instructions, read the verdict form, fill it out, say you're done, come out to the courtroom. I mean, it's a couple hours almost in any case. So he may have just told him, like, be prepared for bad news. Jermaine, I thought CA's case was reminiscent of the Chewbacca defense. I'm not sure what that means, but I don't think it was a compliment. Nirvana, I was not impressed with the prosecution. No mic drop moment. The ladies' man is heading to the pen. How many years total? Wendy next? Life. Life without parole. And again, I don't think she had a mic drop. I don't think she brought the house down. I don't think she put on the performance of her life. But I think she hit just enough on that defense and chipped away at it just enough to where the jury was thinking, like, are we really going to believe this guy? Kelly D, can you explain why Dan got in trouble when he said Charlie Adelson had been in jail? That seems to cause an uproar when it happens. I didn't see that he got in trouble. They let it in multiple times. So sometimes you don't want that. And I know he didn't get in trouble when he was questioning about it when Charlie was on the stand. He did get in trouble. There was a moment, I can't remember. There was a couple different moments where there was objections that were sustained. And one of them was when the prosecutor was trying to talk about Sigfredo Garcia's trial, which I don't think did come in. Magbanwa's trial came in and Luis Garcia's plea deal came in, but I don't think anything about Sigfredo Garcia's trial came in. She started trying to talk about it, objection, and then she kind of moved on. Tom, Peter, this case was wild, like 3D chess. His case, future Wendy case, future Donna case, the father too. Does Wendy's testimony gain her any favor? No. Wendy did not do anything to help the prosecution. If you can't tell when she was up there and how the prosecutor crossed her, I do not think that she is going to be of help to anybody. I do think it's going to be hard to convict her. They would only be able to convict her on, obviously she knew. Everybody knew. But she wasn't telling the jokes like Charlie Adelson. It wasn't her money stapled together. She has no connection. The phone calls do not include her when Magbanwa and Charlie talk. And I mean, like, logically, it makes sense that she would be involved. But honestly, if you think about the mountain of evidence that was used to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, it was not just surmising that he had to be involved. He must have hated him. He's the one with the money. No, they had way more than that. Way more than that based on his own words. And I don't know that they have that with Wendy. I think they've got a lot of it with Donna. I don't know that they have that with Wendy. Sandra D, thank you so much for gifting these memberships. All right, let's get back to closing arguments. And of course, I will answer more questions in a bit. All right, so let's jump ahead a little bit to another thing that I thought was a great point, and that is, and we're just going to look at a still shot here real quick, how Donna Adelson acted during the bump. She didn't even care to look at what was on that paper. Who does that? the first thing you would do is look at the paper. The first thing. And then they have the tapped phone calls that she goes and calls Charlie immediately. And just like the prosecutor said, which we talked about, his curiosity just got the best of him. He had to know what was on it. He couldn't wait. Like Donna Adelson was asking him to wait. And now here we go. Another great part. Let's compare Charlie Adelson on the stand with Charlie Adelson from the videos. Let's explain how he acted during a real extortion, well, a real fake extortion. What was it? Charlie's was a fake real extortion and the undercover cop was a real fake extortion. I don't really know. Now I'm confusing myself. But when the UC, the undercover agent, tried to extort Charlie Adelson, we saw how the man would handle it. And guess what? That's not at all the story he told us. We talked about this during his cross-examination. Two very different ways to handle extortion. And she does a great job of laying it out here. So let's listen to it.
If they had any evidence, we'd have already gone to the airport. Does that sound like an innocent man? Even if they bug your phone, you're still not talking about any of this. Talking about what? The cops would only bug your phone to get information about the murder. And if you don't have any, then there's nothing to not talk about. The cops aren't going to be doing a wiretap to investigate him getting extorted, which he hasn't even reported to law enforcement. So, not talk about what? Defendant discusses how he's going to start arming himself and is prepared to shoot. He told you under oath from the stand that he was being threatened and extorted by gang members for 2 years at the time that this recording was made. And now he's just starting to think about carrying a gun? Does this sound like a man that's been living in fear for 2 years? Does this sound like a guy who lays down and takes his lumps without question when threatened? Someone comes up to me asking for money in my house? He says that. Lines 23 and 24 on the top there. He says this as if it's a preposterous proposition that somebody would just walk into his house and demand money. Isn't that what
Somebody's going to walk into my house and demand my money?
happened to you? How is that preposterous? But wait, what changed? On the next page, he says, yeah. And guess what? When the fucking police show up and there's a doctor, there's an oral surgeon standing there with a dead gang member in his fucking driveway, they're not going to come down too hard on me. This is the same man who took the witness stand and swore under oath that he was a victim in this case.
Use his own words.
And that he had been too paralyzed by fear of gang members to come forward and report his victimization. Dr. Adelson on this recording is the real Dr. Adelson. On the stand, he was so controlled, so knowledgeable about his case, so practiced. But there is no way to explain away his statements on this recording. When the bump happens, you get to observe this defendant in action in his role as fixer, the problem solver. He's working those phones, trying to get Katie to investigate the bump and find out if it's legitimate or not, and also trying to reassure Donna that it's just the cops fishing and it's nothing to worry about.
You know what he's not doing? Is pretending like the bump or the undercover extortion is not happening. He's not pretending nothing's going on. He's not just paying it and keeping quiet and going on with his life. That's not what he's doing. I would have thrown that in there too if I was her. But again, she does a really good job here of going through it and the differences.
The bump is an actual recorded example of how this defendant acts when he is threatened by a purported extortionist. And how he acts is the complete opposite of how he's telling y'all he acted in the first extortion. Number one, he does not stay quiet about the bump. He talks about it a lot. There are multiple calls with Donna and Katie discussing the bump and what the next step should be. Two, he takes action. There are multiple in-person meetings with his mom and with Katie and eventually with his dad too about the bump and what to do about it. Three, he investigates the bump. He asks questions. He enlists Magbanua to find out who this is. He talks a lot about his concerns that this will not be just a one-time payment, but could turn into some ongoing problem. And four, he doesn't take it lying down. He threatens Nazi shit if these people think they can threaten his family and get away with it. He suggests that the problem might require an additional murder. Quote, if he can't do it, I'll find someone else that can.
I mean, to me, that is like Amber said, what's your personal opinion on the case, guilty or innocent? Guilty. I really think his own words on the text messages and the recordings say exactly, I think that's an admission that he was going to get somebody to take care of it if this guy couldn't. And the way he acted with this extortion, I honestly, again, because the defense raised this up that he was extorted and this is just how he acted when he was extorted, like, I think the UC, as bad as it was, as bad as this undercover operation and bump and fake extortion was, I think extortion turned out to be the perfect play on Charlie Adelson because he showed his true colors and how he would act during an extortion. And who would have thought all these years later that this would have been his defense and they would have had the perfect thing to mirror and show that this is exactly not how he would have acted if there was a real extortion after the crime originally occurred.
Number 5, he's suspicious. He does not blindly accept the representations of this purported blackmailer that approached his mother.
Who would?
It's clear from the Dolce meeting that he doesn't fully trust Katie. He certainly doesn't trust this purported blackmailer that bumped into his mom. The person that represented himself, the person that approached his mom represented himself as a Latin King gang member, right? I'm a brother of this guy that I met in Broward or whatever.
Even she's kind of making fun of it.
Yet the defendant does not take his word for it that he's a gang member. He's not so in fear for his mother's life that he opens the safe and gets $5 grand more out and gives it to Katie. A pittance compared to the amount he's telling you he handed out to the first layer of extortion. Number 6, he doesn't pay. He doesn't bring the $5 grand to Dolce and give it to Katie and say, go pay it. Because that's what I do when I threaten to pay.
Literally immediately paid with no questions asked. And that was $150,000 of the dollars that he worked so hard and loved so much and looked at and stapled. But when it's $5 grand, he puts up this kind of fight. That is so telling. So telling. This is what we were talking about in cross-examination. This is what we were asking for. Go back and listen. Compare these two. It makes no sense. And the way he explained it away was, well, I knew this was a fake one because I had been through it before, and now I'm an expert because I know how everybody extorts everybody, and I knew this must be fake. It's like, really, you knew so much about this one that what kept you afraid for all those years and all those payments, you weren't afraid even a little bit with this guy, not enough to pay him $5 grand and keep trying to figure out if it was real or not?
He didn't pay. He didn't ever pay. And it's only $5 grand. Instead, he analyzes and thinks through and talks about every possible scenario. Defendant says it's one of two things or one of two scenarios. One being the cops, 2 being someone actually trying to blackmail his family about this murder. According to him, now he's been blackmailed for 2 years. And he's talking to Catherine Magbano. He's talking to the person that's been collecting his money all those months. But at no point does he acknowledge the first extortion in the Dolce meeting. Why not? Oh, because she asked me not to talk about it. Well, times have changed. There's a second extortion effort now, and they're approaching my mother. You think I'm not going to mention the first extortion?
No way. No way is that how it's going to go. Let's answer a couple more questions. John, I feel like a lot of times can understand a hung jury, i.e. like myself, to question unknown facts, which I admire you questioning facts 1,000%, especially when there's no proper proof. Thoughts about the unknown. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And the state doesn't have to have every single detail and prove every single detail beyond a reasonable doubt. But with the totality of the evidence, if they can prove beyond any reasonable doubt that this defendant committed the crime, then you have to vote guilty. And that's what it comes down to. But if the defendant can tell you that enough stuff is missing and they didn't prove this or they didn't prove that to where you say, man, I'm just not sure. You don't have that feeling of sureness. Then you've got to vote not guilty. And I just had a buddy who sat on a criminal trial and he's like, it is hard. And his was like a DUI. It wasn't the biggest deal in the world, but he's like, it's hard. There's no manual. I know, man. It's really hard. And I think John's point, especially for thinkers, it's hard. It's really hard. Dimitri, what about Donna? Did she also get immunity or they can go after her? No doubt in my mind, she knew everything. So as far as I know, she does not have immunity. And that's who most people think they're going to go after next. Shalisa, didn't know you knew Professor Markell. 2, I had him for crim law my 1L year. Been following this case since 2014. Glad to see justice served. Me too. I mean, I remember when I heard about this and it was just like the biggest shock. You don't think of this stuff happening in these kinds of neighborhoods and to these kinds of people, whatever that means, right? It's like, no, nothing ever happens in suburbia in Tallahassee to a law professor, this really established and smart guy who, wants to help people. But it's like, yeah, he was probably mean in his family law case, and a lot of people are. And it turns out that his in-laws were the type of family that would do something like this. The unthinkable. Leon, in the rebuttal closing argument, the state questioned why Charlie didn't come forward about the extortion after he was arrested. Is that allowed? It's a good question. I didn't catch it. I didn't catch them saying after he was arrested, because that could be commenting on the defendant's Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. I didn't catch that, but I would have a problem with that. I would have objected to that if I was the defense attorney. If they didn't object, then they probably waived it for appeal, but I don't remember that. Peter, can Charlie become a prison dentist? Unlikely, because of the tools he would have to use. The only stuff I've ever heard is like they become like doctors, where like the other inmates will talk to them and ask them questions and tell them about how they're feeling, but they never actually can like prescribe medicine or use tools to do oral surgery and stuff like that, that I've heard of when you're in prison for life. Johnny's girl, if he's not guilty, the family is still in danger. I would think yes, but he would have been in danger all those years. His family would have been in danger while he was in prison for a year and a half. And now they would be in danger, I would think. But the problem is, back when Garcia was convicted and Rivera pled, the family could have been in danger way back when. So Debbie said, clearly Georgia did a great job. She won her case against one of the big fish too. Biggest win of her life. So I don't know all the cases she's covered. I don't know if this is the biggest win of her life. I think she did a good job. But I will just tell you, I don't think the defense attorney did a bad job. I thought closing was not amazing. I was expecting his close to be better. But I thought throughout the trial he did a good job. I don't love the defense, but I think he presented it as good as he could have with what he was dealing with in the hand that he was dealt. So I don't think it's like, great attorney always wins and bad attorney always loses. Sometimes great attorneys lose and bad attorneys win. Sometimes bad attorneys lose and great attorneys win. So I don't necessarily think that that's always the case, and that's how we should judge every attorney, is just on wins and losses, because most criminal defense attorneys lose the vast majority of their cases, even the great ones. And I'd love for anybody to talk to me that disagrees with that. That's a lawyer. Jermaine, Chewbacca defense is South Park lawyer joke. It does not make sense, or trying to confuse with obscure theories. Google for a quick laugh. I will have to. I watched like one or two South Park. I was not like a huge South Park guy, but I will absolutely Google that after this is done. Nirvana. He's crazy blaming the Latin Kings. He's headed to their home, a payment plan. I'm sure he still owes. He's not going to make it in prison. His Nazi statement, Aryans have a home there, all for his sister. I mean, at this point, I don't think he's thinking about prison. I don't think he's thinking about how's it going to go in prison. He's doing everything he can, scratching and clawing, to not go to prison. And I really can't blame him for that. All right, let's get back to the closing here. All right, so she takes some more shots at him in his own statements, and I thought these were really, really good too.
Then I don't want to slide to this, but he goes on to talk about what he will do for her. I don't have to sit here and tell you what I would do. I show you what I could do. You know what I'm saying? You know how I am. I look for things to do. You don't ask me for shit. Didn't she ask you for $138,000 in a payment plan and then another $195,000? You don't ask me for shit. I look for things to do for you. Is that a statement that would be made to his blackmailer, or at least the woman that's taking the money to the blackmailers? These are just a selection of the incriminating quotes on this Dolce Vita recording, and I know it's a struggle to listen to it. You will have the recording, not the transcripts, but you have all the audios. The transcripts are just demonstratives. They don't go back.
So I thought that was interesting too, and people have questions sometimes. Do the transcripts go back? No, they're demonstratives to help the jury understand during the trial, but the actual audios go back. But she's right. She's like, you don't ask me for nothing. You see what I can do. That's the kind of guy he is. Tom said, Peter, you knew this man. Tough to cover on your part. Thank you for doing it. Not an easy choice. Many thanks from all of us in the Lawyer You Know family. Yeah, and I went back and forth, as you guys know. I mean, both of these trials that are going on right now have different reasons. Were kind of weird, I will say, for me to cover. I don't mind knowing the lawyers or knowing the judges or stuff like that, but it's knowing details that are not coming in the courtroom like intimately and in ways a lot of other people don't know. But I'm glad I watched this trial. I'm glad I saw the evidence that they had, and I didn't just walk around thinking like, obviously the brother with money from the in-law hired the hitman. Makes total sense because no hitman would just go up there and do this on his own. But I'm glad I saw his actual words, actual texts, listens to the recordings, because I do feel confident they got the right guy and got the just result and justice for the Markel family. I do feel like that after watching the trial. New Chris, never heard of him. I'm new to the channel. What are the chances Charlie flips on Wendy? He's got nothing to lose. Unlikely, but I guess not impossible. I mean, he'd have to really hate his sister to throw her in prison just to get out a few. They're not going to like let him out. So we're saying like if they change it to 25 years instead of life, so he's 80 years old when he gets out or something, it's like, man, that'd be a burn to your family. I would be surprised. SC, the emails read in closing changed my opinion. The religious manipulation of children and family would have had a big impact if I was on the jury. The worst of the worst. That just showed you there was no line that the Adelson family was not willing to cross to get those kids to South Florida. That's, I think, what the emails showed. Nothing was off limits to them. All right. Oh, an interesting part here that, and I don't really remember a lot of discussion about this during the trial, but they talk about how he was literally having the time of his life after the trial. He had the best year ever. I remember them talking about the best year financially, but this was a really good point too. He's like, he's so nervous after the bump, and he's so nervous after McBanoa gets arrested, and he's so nervous about all this stuff. But what happens directly after the crime was committed when he's supposedly in this depressing, horrible extortion life? Let's hear how she explains it.
Take him down. So she started extorting him. And it states that he would never pay her a dime. In fact, I'm going to get attorney's fees. He's a guy with considerable resources, and he's not a shrinking violet. He's not afraid to use those resources to his advantage. If some street thug was trying to push him around, you think he'd lay down and take that without doing one thing about it?
No way. And you want to know how I know that? Because of his own statements. Again, she brought home a lot of the points that it was like, oh, it's plausible. What Charlie's arguing is plausible. And we're going to go through some of the defense's closing and be like, some of that's plausible, but it's like, this is the stuff. This ain't that guy. He is not that guy.
This slide is a composite of some of the occasions defendant mentions the option of going to the police. And these quotes are specifically in reference to him saying, if you're threatened, you go to the police. If you're threatened, you go to the police. And he has done that before, but he did not go to the police in this case. He didn't go to the police in 2014, not out of fear, as he would have you believe, but because he did this crime. He believed he had gotten away with this crime. He didn't go in 2015 because he was busy that year having the best year of his life. Financially, got in a serious relationship with a new girl, June Mchinda, cruised the intercoastal in his boat. This dude had solved the problem. Everyone was happy. Wendy and the boys were back in South Florida where they belong. Mom was happy. He was making money hand over fist. June described the beginning of their relationship. June Mchinda described the beginning of her relationship with this defendant in October of 15 as a fairy tale. He is not sweating anything, folks. And that
But Miss Prosecutor, Katie told him to act like it never happened. That's what he did. He was just acting like it never happened. He was dating girls, going on his boat, making hundreds of thousands of dollars because he was just acting like it wasn't happening, that he was getting extorted and in fear for his life, that the Latin kings were going to come get him. Just doesn't make sense. It's not reasonable, like she said, that this is how it happened. Seems like a guy that just paid the bill and helped his family out and was moving on. And I think she did a good job explaining that. I really do. All right, so let's watch the last time. I think she kind of tries to shred his theory a little bit more. We'll listen to this.
You may continue with your argument.
Now, here we are in the trial of Charlie Adelson, and the truth has been revealed. Once again, the state got this almost right. That's what you heard in the opening from Mr. Rashbaum. We understandably thought that his client, Mr. Adelson, was the hirer of this murder, but there's a twist. Nothing is as it appears to be. The defendant is really the second victim in all of this. Per his theory, the killers drove to Miami tries to kill someone they'd never met and had no motive to kill in hopes that Charlie Adelson would, one, not report them for murder, and two, would instead agree to give them large amounts of cash at that time and on a payment plan over the next, I don't know, years. Other than failing the smell test, there are a few specific problems with the defense theory. One, how would the killers have known where to go to kill Markel? How would they know who to kill? How could the killers have known that Dan Markel was scheduled to leave town the day after the murder? Three, possibly the biggest problem, the theory itself makes no sense. Were they just hoping that this would work? We're going to go all the way out there and kill somebody, and maybe they'll give us some money. They were going to confess to doing the murder.
You see the little smirks from the defense attorney? It's like they had an answer for everything. They did. But a lot of times during the defense's closing, he would talk about the state's theory. He's like, does that make sense? And I'm thinking, yeah, it actually does kind of make sense what the state's saying. But she's just shredding his theories here.
To Charlie Adelson in order to try to get money. Why not just put a gun to his head and take his money? Why not just rob and or extort him with the threat of death by Latin King? That would save you the trip and the murder rap. Their jigsaw puzzle theory is just a pile of pieces that don't fit together. Each explanation is carefully designed to explain one piece of evidence. But how many different explanations can you string together before it's no longer reasonable? How many coincidences can there be before it's no longer a coincidence? This defendant is not a victim.
All right. So that's all we're going to listen to for her first close. Let's jump to the defense's closing where he talks about, again, the puzzle pieces don't fit. We have a mountain of the ones that don't fit. The divorce didn't change his life, didn't matter. He didn't really care. Relocation didn't matter to him. I believe that. I believe that it wasn't about him. I think he was helping Wendy. He was helping his parents. He was the big shot. He was the problem solver. He was the shot caller. He's like, I got this. Don't worry about it. And he took care of it. And it seemed like it worked. The law enforcement officer testified, and I thought this was a good job. Again, I think this lawyer did a good job. Law enforcement officer testified that the hits are usually one-time payments. Extortions are multiple payments. I thought that was a good job. And it was a good job to point that out. He goes through a ton of lies that Kate McBonua told on the stand and in other trials and proffers. And he apologized for his tone, as most defense lawyers do in situations like that. But he also said, she lied to everybody except for Sigfredo Garcia. She even admitted lying to Charlie. Charlie got conned. He was scared, and he thought Katie was protecting him. So I was with him. I was like, yeah, Katie's a liar. How can we believe her? I don't like murdering liars either, like Katie. I agree. How important was she? Why did the state not ask her all these questions? Because they knew she was a liar. But when he said that Charlie got conned, was scared, and Katie was protecting him, I was like, I'm surprised he can sit over there and let you say that. I'm just not buying that as a theory. And then a big deal in this case is the immunity. And he talks a little bit about McBonua's immunity and why she did or didn't do what she did or didn't do.
That's why he thought the money didn't go up every month. That's why he thought he wasn't getting visited by any bad guys. And that made it closer to her over time. Reasonable doubt, a puzzle piece doesn't fit. Immunity. She was offered a get out of jail free card, and she didn't take it. She was offered it before her first trial. Now, she had an explanation for that. I didn't want to turn on my husband. But what about after he was convicted and his appeals were over? Remember, her first trial was in 19. Her second trial was in 2022. See, she couldn't take the immunity offer because when you take the immunity offer, you have to tell the truth. And if you're caught telling a lie, you not only lose immunity, but you've now confessed. You now have no defense. She knew she extorted Charlie. She knew she tricked him. She knew he wasn't part of the murder, and that's why she never took the immunity deal. Reasonable doubt.
She never took the deal because, so here we go. A lying liar who lies, we're going to call a liar a million times over. She would not take the deal because she did not want to lie. That's what he's saying. She didn't take the deal because she knows she was involved and extorted Charlie. First off, you get immunity usually because you're going to admit to some wrongdoing and some crimes. So the state probably I'd be willing to bet, was going to guess Katie McBonwell was going to say, yes, I was the middleman between Charlie Adelson and Sigfredo Garcia, middle woman. So of course she was going to admit wrongdoing. But what defense counsel's theory is, she didn't take the immunity because that would have been a lie. She wasn't the middle woman. She was the only woman. She was the mastermind. She started it.
Puzzle pieces that no matter how hard you try to hammer them in, don't fit. And let me ask you a question. Ask yourself, why, when the state called her as a witness, they didn't ask her one question about the wires? Go back and look at your notes. Not one question about what was said and meant at Dolce Vita. Not one question of what they talked about in the car before Dolce Vita. And then Charlie Adelson takes the stand. And they have an opportunity to rebut him. They have an opportunity to call her back to the stand and say, you're not going to believe this crazy, unreasonable story that Charlie just wove. They don't call her back to the stand. They don't ask her any of those questions because they don't trust her.
And they admit to that. And they don't care. And she was just a piece that fit into their puzzle. I would have said that if I was a prosecutor. Now I'm just thinking of it like, you know why we picked Kate McBonwell? Because there's a Kate McBonwell-sized piece missing in our puzzle from the other trials. And now she finally admits the truth when she's got nothing else to lose. So we put that puzzle piece in. I didn't want her up on that stand any longer than I had to. We know what she did. We know who she is. Put her up there, say the truth, and get out of here. I don't want to see you again. Maybe that would have been a little too harsh. But listen, what do you think? We're going to have Kate McBonwell up there for 2 days? No, thank you. It's not a surprise.
Because they know that she can't answer those questions. Because the truth is, they have doubt. You heard it. They have doubt. That's why it took them 6 years after her arrest to even charge Charlie Adelson.
That's an interesting argument. And she even got up, which I probably wouldn't have done, in rebuttal and was like, it doesn't matter if we have doubt as the state. Do you have doubt as the jury? I would have been like, I have no doubt. That's what I would have said. I've got no doubt, reasonable or otherwise. If he's going to bring me into it, that's fair rebuttal. Usually you're not supposed to make that argument, but if he's going to say I've got doubt, I can get up there and say, no, I don't. He talked about, it was a tragedy in real time. He slept with a firearm. He got cameras. I didn't love that argument by the defense either because there was conversations before that they were looking at cameras. I don't feel like June's testimony really corroborated that he was sleeping with a firearm or when he was or when he wasn't. They had text messages where he said, I'm going to have to start sleeping with a firearm. So they made that a big point. And then I felt like there was evidence that made it sound like it wasn't true. By the way, we're over an hour, but Whitney's gone tonight. Kids are in bed. So let's hang out. We're going to go a little overtime tonight, because I do want to get to the rebuttal as well. Sometimes he said, some things that did make sense and I thought were some good arguments, like Wendy was an open book, gave her phone, emails, whatever, computer, let them have it all. And I know a lot of people are saying, oh, that's easy because she knew she was protected or kept out of it because it was all Charlie, whatever. But in reality, I bet they got a lot of evidence from that. Those emails from Donna Adelson probably came from something that Wendy Adelson just gave them willingly. So that is an interesting argument as far as, again, whether Wendy Adelson's going to get caught in this web. But it is true. She did cooperate. Most people think that's what innocent people do, right? That's what I hear all the time when somebody lawyers up, oh, they must be guilty, which I completely disagree with. But it's got to be the reverse then we've got to discuss as well. An interesting tactic, which I've used before in different ways, like when they try to push a theory so much and you count the amount of times. It's just like, the prosecutor used it on the defense, how many times he said the word extortion, 100 and something times, while the defense now flips and uses it against the prosecutor, which I thought, again, was an interesting argument.
Why would she be worried that they're going to go to the police? It doesn't make any sense. Simply put, These puzzle pieces and others do not fit the state's theory. Why? Because while they want to make this a simple explanation, while they use words in closing 13 times could, 6 times maybe, 2 times maybe not, 3 times suspicious, 6 times coincidence, that is not beyond a reasonable doubt. That is not what we do in this courtroom. We presume innocence. We don't guess. We don't ignore things that don't fit into the theory.
Sorry. Here's where he's going to get to, counting certain words that they said.
Now, I want to turn to the testimony at trial, and I will try not to be repetitive. The first group of witnesses.
Oh, did I miss it? Hold
Yes,
on. I may
there
have
are
missed it.
questions. We don't disagree that the murder of Professor Markel was her. Everything explained. Flee. Police outside. She didn't hide. II 1393. 1 minute and 47 seconds in. A call between Catherine Magbanua and Sigfredo Garcia. She's worried in essence. If they're co-conspirators, it doesn't make any sense. Simply put,
All right. I had a wrong timestamp here. Sorry. He was basically like, they said the word maybe X amount of times. They said could have X amount of times. They said might not have X amount of times. That's not how we deal with this stuff. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. No maybes, no couldas, shouldas. You've got to prove the case if you're the state attorney. All right. Let's hear what they say about Luis Rivera. Again, both sides trying to use Luis Rivera as, very positive evidence for them.
Ryan Fitzpatrick. To me, he had no firsthand knowledge of any murder. When he was about to be sued by Charlie, you learn that just days before coming in this courtroom, he's on a block. Luis Rivera.
Here we go.
The state still doesn't get it. I'm not going to discredit his testimony. Just the opposite. To me, Luis Rivera's testimony was in some ways the most significant. He's an animal, but he was truthful. He said what he knew. It proved firsthand why you must find Charlie Adelson not guilty of all 3 counts. It proved firsthand reasonable doubt. It was an aha moment. Let me remind you of it. He admitted that Katie was the mastermind of the killing. He said that everything had to be cleared through Katie. He said that everything he and Sigfredo knew came through Katie. He said he wanted to do a robbery, but Katie said he couldn't do a robbery. It had to be done this way. We went through all the lies that Katie told him through Sigfredo, the lady being on Trescott, the purpose of the trips, the amount of money. He now understood why he got $37,000 instead of $35,000. We went through the fact that he knew nothing about the payments over time or the gifts to Katie. And here was the punchline. When asked, could this have been an extortion and not a murder for hire? Could they have lied about that to you too? His answer was yes.
Again, I thought Luis Rivera, that's why he felt so honest. Both sides got stuff that they felt like they could use, right? But his testimony also fit in perfectly with what the state was saying and why he wouldn't know a lot of those details. But if he was, excuse me, if he was the shot caller, head of the Latin Kings, who went and did this crime with hopes, gosh, I just swallowed the wrong way. Sorry. With hopes of extorting a doctor, wouldn't he know more, not less? I don't know. All right. The he wanted to keep her happy theory never made sense to me. Kind of like what we talked about with he just sat quiet and pretended like it didn't happen because she asked. Charlie's testimony answered all their questions. Again, this is where he said like he had nothing else to do but watch all these tapes and stuff while he's been in prison for 1.5 years. He felt like he had to explain it away because a lot of people had the same question. I think Diana asked it earlier. And I said, I didn't think it was a great closing. This was my contemporaneous notes. He reiterated common sense several times. Have the courage to say not guilty. But again, I'm always afraid when the defense creates a burden, sometimes life can get very difficult as they try to prove things. Applejacks, do you think they have more evidence on Donna Adelson that hasn't come out yet publicly? How long do you think before the next arrest? Thanks for doing the Q&A. I don't think so. I think we probably have seen most, if not all of it. I have no idea how long or if or when there will be another arrest. Ms. Jones, now they can sue for wrongful death in civil court. Yes, they can. They probably could have before, but now it'll be even easier. John O'Rourke, could you see the guilty in his face? I did for the first time today. I think I saw fear that the jury would convict him for the first time today. I think he's been pretty confident throughout the trial. I do. Carrie, real lawyer, you crucified Georgia for her cross-examination, and now you're singing her praises. I think you are critiquing before the verdict and now backpedaling. Absolutely not. I've said it a million times. First off, if you watch my cross-examination, I actually sang her praises as a lawyer because I think she's a good lawyer and I think she's done a good job. I think the cross was bad. I'll still stand here and say the cross was bad. If you also watch my cross, I said I didn't think it was like bad enough to where they lost the case. I also, if you're listening, don't think that this closing argument was amazing. I don't think it was some performance of a lifetime. I don't think it's something that she's going to, record and keep forever and play in classes on how to give a closing argument. I don't. I think it was good enough to win and to give the jury what they needed. But I think what won this case was all the evidence she presented over all of the days of trial, not this closing argument. You do not win a case in closing argument. So I understand your question, and that's totally fair and fine. And I think you can go. And again, I still have said, I think this defense lawyer did a really good job throughout the trial with what he had, but he lost. So what does that mean? Are you thinking I'm saying he's a bad lawyer because he's lost? Because I really don't. Okay. New Chris, his own parents didn't come to the trial. So I've seen some questions on this, and I think it's important to say, when you see how these cases turn out, where they're trying to connect all the family members, it's a tangled web that's been woven. A lot of times lawyers, my guess is his parents have lawyers. I'll just guess that, just a wild guess as unindicted co-conspirators. My guess is on the advice of counsel, they were told not to talk, not to show up, not to show bias. It's going to be worse for him. Just stay out of the courtroom. It's this, tight family that creates issues and does what they want, and they think they're above it, and they're doctors and whatever. So I think this was probably the advice of people in the inner circle to have them not come, not because they don't want to support him. Just my guess. Maya J, do you think he could have gotten away with it if he had double-crossed the people he hired and had claimed extortion right away? Possibly. But at the time, would they all have just flipped on him? Right? You got to think about it that way too. Jill M, I did think it was weird that Katie didn't take an immunity deal before. Theories why? Honestly, I have no idea. If I had to guess, and again, this is total speculation to guess, maybe Big Shot Charlie said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. I've taken care of it this far, haven't I? Don't worry about it. But eventually, I am shocked that she didn't take it. I don't get how or why. That had to be against the advice of counsel. Brooklyn Basement, will he go to the same prison as Tudo at all? I have no idea. I don't know where any of them are in prison. What is a pre-sentence investigation, Patty asks. It's when they do an investigation, they do interviews, they look into his past, any prior charges, mental health issues, any mitigating factors or aggravating factors, and they present to the court what they think the sentence is going to be. It's going to be life in this case, though. Lady Law Sandra, I think he went on too long. He lost the jurors, but I saw how Georgia used how smart Charlie was and is so smart in her arguments. Yes, I agree. Nirvana, I don't think Charlie is dealing with the head of the Latin Kings. I have no idea. Netwoman, you're at 286,000. Not much longer till 300,000. Woot woot. Can't wait. That's going to be fun. Amanda, I heard a mic drop was unnecessary for a maybe a trial. I don't know. Yeah, you don't have to have a mic drop. It's better if you can, I think, if it's really memorable and you've convinced the jury and you've brought them along with you the whole time. A lot of times this matters in civil trials as well when you're trying to get a big verdict and explain to them why you deserve or your client deserves that much money. Sometimes you need that. Katz, Peter, do you think Georgia's weak arguments on Friday were on purpose so the defense was overconfident for closing while she knew she was going to prove it all? I do not think so. I don't think any lawyer in any trial ever has tried to give weak arguments or do a bad job. I think that what I think happened is she started off strong and thought it was going to go well. He hit her with a couple good things. He knew a specific date and time on a recording, kind of like it seemed like, well, maybe does he know this better than her? Is he going to get the best of her? And then I think she kind of maybe slowed it down a little bit and formed her arguments in a little bit of a different way through cross potentially. But again, I thought closing was much more well put together, hammering on the important parts with a little bit of mix in of too much going over the facts again that I think she had already proven, but maybe I'm wrong about that, right? Because the jury came back quickly with a guilty verdict. Nirvana, him claiming that is a mistake. It's Florida. Lady Los Angeles, said it before. You are the best mentor and your experience is amazing. Thank you for all you do. Thank you, Lady Los Angeles. I appreciate that. I really do. Netwoman gifting 10 more memberships. Just like every time I'm putting it up here, I feel like she's more and more members are joining. It's a wild bunch now. All right, let's get to just a quick second here of rebuttal.
Attention to page 4 of your jury instructions. I'll pick them out. Page 4, middle of the page. Whenever the words reasonable doubt are used, you must consider the following. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt. Could it be? Not good enough. A speculative doubt. Speculation. We don't have that in the courtroom. We don't have that in the jury deliberation room.
Oh, I forgot to mention, the reason that hit so hard is at the end of the defense's closing. And again, why I think it was just not as good as he probably would have liked is this was part of his ending. He's like, you can even speculate to get to a reasonable doubt. Objection. They went back to sidebar. Objection sustained. Then she comes up and hits him with the first thing. You can't actually speculate. Now it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Is this defense attorney telling me stuff that I can't do? Is he wrong? Does he know what he's talking about? Like, if you were considering it, that could be enough to be like, I don't trust this guy anymore. He told me I could speculate. The jury instructions, the judge is going to instruct me that I can't, and the prosecutor just pointed that out. I think I trust her. Now, is that the whole trial flipping right there? Probably not. But it can be important, and that's something lawyers are very careful not to do.
Imaginary or forced doubt. Not reasonable. Such a doubt must not influence you to return a verdict of not guilty if you have an abiding conviction of guilt. When you're back there and you're thinking about what Mr. Rashbaum would have said, he would have said, puzzle pieces. First puzzle piece, the motive doesn't fit because he had a great life and he wouldn't have wanted to ruin his life. The problem with that argument is arrogance. This was not an issue for him because he wasn't going to get caught, because he was untouchable. They said relocation had no impact on Charlie Adelson, and that they proved Wendy's innocence in their questioning of her. Why are they working so hard to convince you Wendy is innocent? Does it matter? Y'all aren't being asked to decide anything about Wendy Adelson. There's nothing on that verdict form about Wendy Adelson. Did she corroborate the defense theory in this case? Wendy Adelson testified she didn't know anything about this supposed extortion of her brother, even though she moved there the day this happened. She didn't know in 14, she didn't know in 15, and she didn't know until it was announced in opening statements in this courtroom. I asked her about it, and she said, quote, well, I learned that someone made that argument. I don't know whether it's true or not. I don't know whether it's true or not. Even his own sister doesn't believe this load he's trying to set me up. Garcia wanted to kill the defendant, so he wouldn't have done a hit on his behalf. And for that, they referred to the jet ski incident. They couldn't be in a conspiracy together because they hated each other. Well, that was part of the purpose of the walling off. The whole theory of this defense is that this defendant was so fearful of Secreto Garcia that he couldn't do the normal thing. He couldn't report this. But he continued to date Catherine Magdanois, Garcia's baby mama, after all this. After July 1, when they had this incident in the roadway. After the extortion. And even after that, he continues to send love notes to Sigfredo Garcia's woman. Even after the two of them get back together, he's still sending those notes because he's so arrogant. Defense has told you that the defendant made the joke about the TV being cheaper than Hitman to people he hardly knew. Who are those people? The only person that testified in this courtroom that they had heard that joke was Wendy Adelson. Lacasse was asked. The lawyer said they said it, but you guys have to refer to your notes and your own memories about what the evidence showed. But Lacasse was asked, did he say the joke at the dinner that y'all went to with Wendy and Garcia and Catherine Magdalena? I'm sorry, Wendy and Charlie and Catherine Magdalena. And he says, no. He does not recall that joke being made, and he thinks he would have recalled it had it been made. So there is no evidence in this trial that the defendant told that joke to people he hardly knew. If this was a murder for hire, it should have been paid in advance. Murder for hires always get paid in advance. That's what Pat Sanford said. That's not what he said. What Pat Sanford said is the arrests have been made close in time after the other murder for hire cases have worked. So there's no payment over time, gifts and stuff like that.
I kind of agreed with the way the defense put that more than the way that she did, but she hit one argument after another on rebuttal, which I think is exactly what you need to do. And it came down to it, and she won. Verdict was guilty, and justice was served for Dan Markel and his family again. So hit that like button if you guys haven't already. There's almost 6,000 people in the chat, so let's get it to 5,000 likes. How about that? 5,000 likes. Can we get that? And make sure you subscribe. I'm going to do some Q&A here before we go. Janet, my guess is whatever sentence he gets for the two charges will be consecutive. Usually that's a way for the judges to show, yeah, we think you're really guilty, as opposed to concurrent, because it really doesn't make a difference on life sentences. Nicole, appreciate you covering this case, Peter. Thanks for your insight as always. Let's get to 300K. Lawyer, you know, family. It's so fun. I mean, this is such an interesting thing to be able to talk about this stuff with people that actually care, are invested, take the time to watch these trials. It's wild. It's like those things where you try to talk about certain. I've had so many people come up to me that say they watch channel and say like, yeah, my husband doesn't watch, so I don't have anybody to talk about it with. So it's really funny. Or even some of my friends who like their wife will watch and they'll be like, yeah, I watched Peter on this stream or whatever today. And they'll be like, seriously? And they're like, well, you don't watch the trial. So, and then some trials they do watch and they can talk about together. So it is always funny. Shannon, what did you think of this judge? This is interesting. Usually people ask me this a lot, and they didn't ask me a ton in this case. What I thought about this judge was I really liked him, but here's the reason why. It's kind of different than a lot of the other trials. I almost didn't notice he was there. He was just like decisive. He made a call when they asked him to make a call. He didn't jump in. He didn't really yell at anybody. He was kind of right down the middle. He was short and sweet. I like that. It's like a referee. You don't want to be watching the referee the whole game, right? And so that was my thoughts on the judge. Robin, welcome. Jay Delgado, thank you for the super sticker. Alina, would Adelson have told his attorney his defense, or would Rashbaum come up with that on his own? What I believe they would say is Charlie Adelson told his lawyer that's what happened, and that was the truth, and that's the defense the lawyer presented to the jury. Nicole, Peter, I saw a juror, I assume. Jurist usually means so judge, but juror say she changed her verdict after seeing the defendant's reaction to the not guilty verdict when she was polled. She said, no, that's not my finding, even though it was. Is that allowed? Usually I would say no. I've never seen that happen, but if that is what she voted back in the jury room, I don't think she can change her mind now just by looking at, that's not evidence what she's looking at, the defendant's reaction. So I don't think that would be appropriate. Nirvana, what trial are you looking at now? Well, I'm going to pop over here first to Pickles and Zoe. Will you be covering the Maya closing arguments tomorrow? Yes, I will. So we're first off going to take care of Maya with closings and a verdict. And then I have no idea what's next. I don't know when the YNW Melly retrial is going to start. I don't know what's next. I'm sure you guys will tell me. There is some stuff happening in other cases I think we're going to look into later this week. We're going to do a members only live Friday this week. So all the members, all the new members especially, don't miss it. It's so much fun to hang out. We don't talk about a specific case, but we talk about all sorts of other things. Lady Los Angeles, Peter, I'm so passionate like the defense and Georgia, is so composed. I believe this will always hinder any argument I make. What are your thoughts on this? So practice to make it less like really pounding the table. You want some of it. And when you practice, you kind of talk through, especially your arguments, opening statements and closing argument, or the speeches, as I call them. Practice so that you know when to turn it up and when not to. Practice for some of your friends, and they'll be like, whoa, Sandra, like, are you yelling at me? Like, did I do something? And you'll figure out that right balance of when to turn up the passion, when to turn it down, because you do have to be composed. You have to be professional. They can't think you have too much riding on this or this is personal for you. They have to understand it's your job so that if you go hard on a witness, they don't take it out on your client. There's a lot of different ways to kind of deal with it, but I think practice is really the best way, and doing it in front of people that you trust. Yes, Joanne, closing arguments are given before someone finds someone guilty. I think what the question was asking is after the jury said not guilty, the defendant was like, whoa, they actually believed me. And she was like, whoa, now I think he's guilty. So it was after closings, after deliberation, after the verdict, then she changed her mind is how I read the question, but I could be wrong. Jana, Peter, what would your defense strategy be for Donna at this point? Is it even possible for her to pivot anyway from Charlie's wild extortion narrative? She could just say, I had no clue what was going on. Charlie told me he was getting extorted. That could absolutely not be true, but I didn't know I was scared. Now Charlie's telling me he was extorted. I have no idea what was going on. I never talked to Catherine McManua. I don't know if Catherine McManua can really point the finger at Donna Adelson either. I think they would need Charlie as the link in that chain to point to Donna. So I don't know. There could still be more defenses she has that Charlie did not have. Welcome, Kez Chick and SJ, who just joined right in time. Brad Powers, I like this one. Thanks for all the live streams. 9-0, go Knowles. We've got Miami and Florida left. 2 rivalry games. They're down years for both of them, but still games that give me anxiety. And then South Alabama, I can count that one as a win. Question about your J Hatch video from today. Why did Judge Carroll tell the plaintiff that the IJ reports would be important for the punitive damages? Based on knowledge and wrongdoing and how high up it goes, all of that's going to come into play with punitive damages. Hopefully we get there so we can kind of watch together how that happens. I think it'd be a really cool learning experience for people because it's unusual. All right, hour and a half. That's my max. I got to call it. I appreciate you guys so much for joining. Hit that like button before you leave, please, and subscribe. We're really trying to hit that 300K mark by the end of the year. Azam, thank you so much for spending overtime recapping for us. It's late for you now. The best lawyer I watch on YouTube, in my biased opinion. At least you can admit it, Azam. And we hope you feel better. Keep us posted. Hate to see anybody under the weather, but at least you had something to watch, right? And Azam is going to give just one more membership on our way out. One more of you is going to join us this week, hopefully for the members only live. But that's all I've got. I appreciate you so much. Every single person that comes here gets in the chat, asks questions, answers questions, discusses what they think about the case. I think I froze there for a second, but a perfect time to freeze because I'm out of here anyways. I appreciate you all. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who might be interested here on YouTube. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, at Lawyer You Know. But on Instagram, we are still at Tragos Law. So look us up on there. And don't forget to listen to the Lawyer You Know podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us, lawyeryouKnow@gmail.com. Of course, all of these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.